this. Hi, everybody, and welcome to all of you who are joining us. While we're waiting, you can go ahead and maybe tell us in the chat where you're from. I know we have some people in Europe who are just about ready for bedtime, so they might be asking for a recording, and yes, we will have a recording, and you'll be able to get it. So yeah, just pop in the chat, let us know where you're from, and maybe something about what your interest is in working with dogs, and then we'll get started. We've got about a minute or so before we need to get started. Hello, Maria from Barcelona. Yeah, it's past your bedtime, isn't it? Thank you for joining us. Ah. Yeah. So I will ask everybody to stay muted unless later on you want to unmute and ask a question. Ah, yes, Barcelona. It must be beautiful there. Oh. Bolivia. Oh, Susan, thank you for joining us in Florida. Okay, well, we'll just wait maybe another half a minute. and then we'll get started. And if you don't know Karen London, I'll tell you a little bit about her. Before she gets started, she's going to have some really fabulous information to share with us today, and I cannot wait. So I'm excited. Ah, I love it. No, I can't believe Arizona got a snowstorm. I think of you guys.
Yeah, I live at 7,000 feet, so we get 100 inches of snow a year, and it seemed like a whole bunch of it came yesterday.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I kind of can identify a little bit. I'm in the valley, but surrounded by mountains. So whenever there's snow, the mountain, anybody who's in the mountains is just there. They're there until it melts. So, yeah. Okay, so let's get going. Welcome everybody. I'm so happy so many of you could join us today. I'm really excited about this topic. It's something that's very near and dear to my heart, and I love helping people and talking to them about their dogs that get emotionally overexcited. It's something that's really, really important. It's such an important topic. So let me tell you a little bit about Karen, and then we'll get started. Karen London is a certified professional dog trainer, a certified applied animal behaviorist. She's also an author and an educator. She received her Ph.D. in zoology from the University of Wisconsin and started training dogs in 1997. Karen worked with Patricia McConnell as a dog behavior consultant specializing in aggression cases. And her most recent book, Treat Everyone Like a Dog, is about what she learned as a dog trainer that she has applied to her interactions with people. And we're going to talk about Karen's book, and I have it right here. And I know some of you have told me already that you have read it or that you have it. And if you haven't, I think you're going to be really excited to go and learn more about it once we finish talking. So Karen, thank you so much for joining us for this talk. I'm so excited to hear what you have to say about dog emotions. And our topic today, as many of you already know, I'm sure, is taking your dog's emotional temperature. So Karen, can you tell us what that means to take your dog's emotional temperature and what we can look for in our dog's body language to kind of understand what the emotions are that they're feeling?
Sure. And first of all, thank you so much for having me on to do this, Marilyn. It's such a pleasure. And thank you all of you who have joined us, especially those of you who are, on another side of the planet and for whom this time is, there's no good time for everyone. I'm glad to see everyone here. In terms of, I often think about taking a dog's emotional temperature, which isn't a technical phrase. It's just that whenever I work with the dog, whether it's just a casual greeting of a strange dog, or if I'm working with them, whether they're aggressive or it's general training, or I'm meeting a friend's dog, I just kind of want to see where they're at and respond accordingly, just like social people do with other social people. So if a dog seems fearful, that's obviously a really important thing to know in order to interact with them. But also if they seem excited or frustrated or nervous or unsure or exuberant, the state that they come to you in influences how I'm going to interact with them in a lot of different ways. So I always feel like the first thing I need to know about a dog is sort of where they're at emotionally.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. And so what are some of the things you look for, Karen? What clues do you have that will help you to understand where the dog is at, and then what you can do that's appropriate for where the dog is?
Sure. Well, one of the things I often think about is it's a difference between whether I really know the dog well or I don't know the dog so well. So take a dog that I know really well, and normally they would be, looking at me, hopefully bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and interested in some kind of training or interaction, and they seem, in a very general sense, off. Like maybe they're a little distracted. They're like looking at something else, or they're attending to something on their body, like they're licking, or they're, kind of cocking their head, or I get the idea that they're not really with me. That's going to affect how, what I ask them to do, if I ask them to do anything, what my expectations will be. If it's a dog I don't know, since I do specialize in aggression, safety first, it's absolutely critical that I read dogs' emotions in order to keep myself safe and to keep everyone else safe, and frankly, to keep the dog safe, because if they do something aggressive towards me, it's sort of worst case scenario would be for someone to say like, oh my gosh, I took my dog to the behaviorist and my dog bit the behaviorist. That's not, and I've been bitten twice in my whole life by dogs. Once when I was doing research in Costa Rica, I went into a pasture where a dog had just given birth to puppies, and that dog bit me. And then one time a client's dog bit me. So that's in 25 years. I mean, I wish it were zero, but it's not a lot. But I'm looking mainly for signs of fear, because I calculated once for my own set of clients over a period of maybe 5 years that 80% of the dogs with the bite history, it was mainly prompted by fear. So I'm looking at, obvious ones like making the body smaller, tail tucked, eyes really dilated, ears back, whale eye, shaking, quivering, panting, and other signs of maybe not fear, but anxiety, yawning, tongue flicking, shaking things off. Any of those give me a sense that the dog is not comfortable in that environment, and that's going to influence everything I do with them from that point forward.
Yeah. And when you see that kind of thing, when you see fear, what's the best approach? Because I know that sometimes we approach dogs from a human perspective. We act the way we think a human would want us to act, but dogs don't necessarily respond the same way. So if you see a dog that's fearful, like the big obvious signs, trembling or quivering, some people would want to approach the dog. So what would you recommend as a way to manage a dog that is obviously uncomfortable or fearful?
Well, in the general sense, I do exactly the same for people as I do for dogs, which is to take the pressure off. So that might mean talking more quietly, certainly creating greater distance, turning away from them, asking the person that's with them to, like if someone that come to see me, to move the dog further away, for that person to do some kind of soothing for them, but just absolutely take the pressure off. Same as I would like if I don't know, like if I were wearing a scary Halloween costume and a little kid got scared, the first thing I would do is like take off whatever part of it that I thought was scaring them, like if it was a mask or, whatever. So always take the pressure off. With dogs, a lot of times I avoid having the dog be fearful by taking a really proactive approach. So anything that might make them happy, I want to do. And that most often that means giving them treats, but it might mean giving them a toy. It might mean squeaking a squeaker. It might mean getting lower. It might mean, putting some kind of barrier between the dog and me. So some dogs seem to understand like, okay, that physical barrier, like a gate or a fence or a half a door, gives them some sense of safety and security, but it's always take the pressure off and do what I can to make them feel more comfortable.
Yeah. And distance is one way to do that. I know that moving farther away, which for a lot of people is kind of counterintuitive. They think about going closer to calm the dog, but getting distance is often helps the dog feel a little safer, that they're in a comfort zone.
Right. And especially because a lot of the dogs I'm meeting, I don't know well, they're not my dog. But certainly like if someone owns a dog, has a dog that is scared of thunder or scared of loud sounds or scared of the person that comes in, going to them, comforting them, soothing them, like approaching a fearful dog, if you have the capability of soothing them, always a great idea, because I'm often talking about dogs that I'm meeting and I'm a stranger. It's very unlikely that I'm going to be able to soothe one of those dogs by getting closer. The best thing I could do is let them know that I respect their space and I'm not trying to push them into anything that makes them any more uncomfortable than they are. And in fact, trying to ease that. One of the things I often do with dogs that I'm just meeting is see if they're interested in toys or play. Because sometimes there's some dogs, and I'm sure most people have met one like this, they seem a little unsure, a little tentative, anxious, fearful, and you bring out a tennis ball or a squeaky toy, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, great, you're one of the people that is like a squeaky toy vending machine, ball playing machine. Like, okay, you're in the club, you're familiar, like, welcome to my world. Not obviously not all dogs, but some dogs. And even if the dog doesn't, like if the owner's like, wow, he's usually really interested in balls, and you offer one and they don't get interested, that tells you, okay, in this environment with me, they're not interested. And I often find I use play a lot in my work. One of the things I love about play, besides that it so often makes dogs happy, which is very often the goal, because very often dogs don't have a training issue. They have the way they feel causes a behavioral problem. If you can change the way they feel, you change the way they act. Like if they're afraid of men and you can make them unafraid of men, they're not going to charge at them anymore. So it's an issue, an emotional issue. You can often assess dogs so well with play. Dogs don't play if they're not comfortable. They might take treats. They might take them kind of in that alligator snatchy way. Their emotions still aren't calmed down, but they still want the treat. And if you've ever seen a dog that kind of comes up to someone and then they're like really like wide-eyed and like, okay, and they snatch the treat and go back, that's not a dog that's being made happy by the treat. That's a dog that's unhappy in some way or fearful, but wants the treat bad enough to go for it. But dogs don't tend to do that with toys. If you can get them engaged in play and a toy, that's a good assessment tool, because that expresses some level of comfort. Because play only happens, behaviorally speaking, ethologically, when dogs are comfortable enough not to be in kind of a survival mode.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned ethologically, and I know that in your book you discuss canine ethology a lot, and that has a lot to do with assessing the behavior that you're talking about. So maybe you could just go into that a little more. I know we have people on here who are very interested in understanding canine behavior. So that might be really helpful to them if you could kind of, expand on that topic a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. Well, ethology is the study of animal behavior. And when people, I usually say that I'm an animal behaviorist, but I'm really trained as an ethologist. And the difference is generally the ethology was the study of animal behavior of animals in their natural environment. And it was largely the European school of the study of how animals act. A lot of people from Germany and Austria and the Netherlands particularly, but other countries as well. And animal behavior, as we often understand it with like operant conditioning and like the quadrants of that and Skinner, that was a very American set of studies. And the easiest way that I think of it, and a professor of mine in grad school at Wisconsin, which even though it's an American school was more along the ethological lines, said that an ethologist puts him or her, they said himself, but I'm going to say him or herself, in a box, meaning they would be out in the field behind a blind, sort of hiding so they could see the animal's natural behavior without them influencing it. And animal behaviorists put the animals in a box. There's a lot of people that studied rats and mice and birds in cages and in boxes. So the ethologist puts themselves in a box and an animal behaviorist puts the animal in a box. And to me, ethology is just the study of natural behavior. Humans have natural behavior, things we naturally do, every other animal does. So with dog ethology, a lot of that means, well, what do they naturally do in this situation? Like the fact that they chase things that run, the fact that they respond to squeaky noises that gets their attention, the fact that if they are wanting to get more information or they're confused or they hear something unusual, they'll cock their head, which is very handy when you're taking pictures, for example. And ethology, any kind of reading of body language or their vocalizations, understanding all those behaviors they do, that's really the study of ethology, which a lot of dog trainers do, whether they call it that or not.
Yes, and I love that comparison. I'd never heard that before, and that's really so helpful. And I think the where we're heading now in the work that we do with training dogs is more along the lines of studying how the animals naturally act and what their natural behaviors are, and then trying to make the work that we do with them more congruent with what's more natural to the dogs. So if we're trying to evaluate a dog's emotions at the moment, how can we do that in a more natural way without trying to, literally put the animal in a box and try to, assess how he would act under controlled conditions, because those conditions don't always exist in everyday life. So how can we use that concept of dogs as in their natural behavior, and how can we help them become more emotionally relaxed, and help them with assessing fear, for example, if they're fearful? How can we use nature? You mentioned play, so maybe that would be one of the ways.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of the idea of assessing dogs and understanding them and helping them do what they do naturally is a lot of it observing, like, what do they want to do if given the choice? Like, a lot of behavioral studies have to do with choice. Like, for example, whenever I'm working with a new dog, I like to give them choices. Like, if they're taking treats from me, I will always have multiple treats and hold them out and see which one they're most interested in. And some dogs, they'll just eat them both in quick succession, but they'll often choose one over the other. And that tells you, okay, this is a higher quality treat. So you're letting them tell you who they are, which is a lot about the study of ethology. Another thing is just to observe, like, okay, what is it that makes them, run away? Like, obviously, like just recently, I unfortunately dropped a really loud pan on my tile floor. And, guess what? There was a dog in my house who ran the other way. That's not rocket science to figure that out. But okay, but I've also, a few years ago, I was dog sitting a dog who was out in the backyard, and one of my sons had a balloon. The dog kind of went at the balloon with its nose, and the balloon popped, and the dog didn't care at all. It's like, wow, that is not a sound sensitive dog. So just observing what they do and who they are, and letting them tell you. And I really always love the concept of, with a dog, like, see the dog. I like to think of it as see the dog, not the story. The story can be their history or what they did yesterday or what breed they are. All that's part of their story. When you see the dog, you see what they do, like who they are. And I really love to pay attention to that. I also think a book that came out a couple of years ago that probably most people have read is the Canine Enrichment book. And that is so much about letting dogs be who they are and understanding their natural behavior, because the whole idea of enrichment is offering them an environment in which they can express all of the natural behaviors that are possible. So I think so much of understanding who dogs are is observing them and giving them opportunities to tell you about who they are and what they like and what they prefer. And I'm amazed how many people, in a good way, how many people really know that. If you said, oh, does your dog prefer chicken or steak? A lot of people know. Does your dog prefer a ball or a frisbee? They know. Does your dog prefer like this visitor or that visitor? Does your dog prefer to go for a walk in the park or a walk in the neighborhood? Like, people know because they've observed their dogs. And I think, and especially frankly with COVID, I think all of us had a lot more time to be like, I'm not watching Netflix right now. I can watch my dog at least as a break. So different things.
So true. So true. Yes. We spent a lot of time with our dogs during COVID, which is, the dogs loved it, but we may have gotten a little cabin fever, but yeah.
There was a downside for sure.
Yeah. I love that idea about giving the dog choices. Do you want to do this or do you want to do that? How do you think that idea of giving them a choice, how does that help them emotionally?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I think in several ways. One is that they get what they want. So if they, if you offer them 2 toys and they prefer this one, they get what they want. And I also really feel strongly that in the idea of agency, like to give them options when they get to make choices. I think it gives them a sense of power and control, not in a like a dictator kind of way, but just having control over their environment and over their world, I think can be really helpful. Like I've had clients whose dogs seem really, really like it's so important to them to choose that I'll say, oh, let them choose this leash or this leash. So they want the short leash, or they want the long leash. Let them choose before walks, or let them choose which dog food bowl they'd prefer to eat of, or if they'd prefer to have it on the floor directly, or like on a placemat rather than a dog bowl. Like, I think dogs love the opportunity to make choices. And one of the best things that we can do to give dogs choices is to let them, if it's safe, be off leash, because dogs want to do what we want to do. They want to run where they want to run. And well, I'm not saying we want to sniff, but, explore the world in the way we want to explore. Like, I think about it, like if I went to a museum, I would want to say like, oh, I really want to spend time at this painting, or I'm really interested in this sculpture. When dogs go on walks, it's the same thing. Oh, I really want to sniff this blade of grass. Lord knows why I don't, but they do. Give them then the opportunity. And I think being off leash gives dogs the opportunity to choose their speed, their location, their destination, again, if it can be done safely.
Right. And off leash, or even just taking them on a walk on a long leash. I mean, we somehow have been conditioned to think that when we walk the dog has to march right beside us. And that's just not much fun for the dog, especially because they process the world through their nose. So more and more now, people are learning that if they just let their dog sniff and stop and investigate, where a critter may have been, yesterday, they can pick up those odors, that is very enriching for the dogs, and giving them those kinds of choices also helps them. And I also love what you said about agency, because we all need to feel that we have some control over the things that are affecting us, the things in our environment that are affecting us. If we don't have any control over anything, it's really a scary kind of experience. So giving dogs that kind of control is emotionally soothing to them, emotionally happy or healthy, or however you want to describe it. But it's got to feel good for dogs to feel that they have some kind of control. What would you say to someone who is afraid that giving the dog control and choices will somehow impact negatively their authority over the dog, that they feel like?
Yeah, I have that, well, I'll answer that in a second. I just want to go back to something you said, but I really do have that stored in my mind. But when you were talking about them being on long leashes, and like, I'm sure a lot of people know the word sniffari, like take your dog on sniffari. They just get to sniff where they want to sniff, and you follow them, lest they try to go someplace like into the road where it's not safe. And I think that's so great. That's what they want to do. And I kind of have two kinds of walks that I'll do with most dogs. I either take them on sniffari, the walk's about them. They sniff where they sniff. If they want to run, we run, whatever. And then the other kind of run, I'm a runner, and I'm like, the other kind of walk we go on is it's my run and they are getting to come along. Of course, I'm going to let them stop to potty, but not 17 times in a mile or something. But so most walks with the dog that I take, I would be, for them. But when I'm running, it's like, that's about me, because I need to run so that I can be my best version of myself. So, so that's one thing. And then in terms of giving them agency, I had a client recently who accidentally discovered that her dog, who had been some challenges with cutting the nails, but if the dog was lying up on their bed, the dog was perfectly happy to have its nails cut. And so I just said, like, so what she would do is she would hold the nail clippers up, and the dog would jump on the bed, and then she would cut his nails. And if the dog didn't jump up on the bed, then she just didn't cut the dog's nails then. And this dog would choose to do it often enough. And you know what? I'm sorry to say this, but I said I would record that last thing in my mind about what you asked, and then it just slipped my mind. So
what? Yeah.
Sorry.
What would you say to
the authority, if it's
yeah,
authority. Yeah,
authority.
sorry. I have that conversation almost every week with clients, and I often talk to people about how it's really a philosophical approach. Like, I am not an authoritarian person. I'm not that way when I teach. I'm not that way with my children. I'm not that way with any dogs. So I usually just talk to people and say that, it's a relationship you're having with the dog, not like, like an equal relationship of sorts, where you each are helping each other. You have a dog for a reason, and hopefully you can make the dog happy. So I always say that I just never feel that if the dog gets to make choices, that it has anything to do with authority. You're just letting them be who they are. And of course, in some sense, we all are in charge, in the sense that, like, if I need to take a dog to the vet, the dog has to go to the vet. The dog doesn't get to say, like, yeah, I know I've been, like vomiting and, and this and that, and or I'm limping, but, I don't want to go. Like, I still get to say, like, I am still in charge, not in an authoritarian way, but in a caretaking way. So I often talk to clients about how, if your dog wants to be out in front, and especially I think this is true of a lot of the hunting and retrieving breeds, they naturally seem to be out in front, which is why I think a 10-foot lead often works so much better than a 6-foot lead, because they often want that play. I don't think it is any damage to their relationship. And most of the people I talk to about this are relieved, because they've been taught that, like, the dog needs to be walking here and heel, and they need to be looking up at you respectfully. And I just say I disagree, but it's the philosophical issue, depending on sort of just how you are about raising the individuals in your life that you're, responsible for. And honestly, the only reason I ever teach a dog that I own to heel is because I'm a dog trainer. If I didn't have a dog that could heel, I think that people wouldn't like it. All I want is a dog that walks nicely on the leash. Like, I train a formal heel, but it's no more important to me than teaching a dog to sit pretty or roll over. It's just a trick. All I need is for them to walk nicely without, because I'm sure many of us have had the experience of, like, kind of going out water skiing with the dog. I don't want that. And, many dogs need help to not do that, but I don't need a dog doing a formal heel, except that I'm a dog trainer and people expect me to have a dog do that. So that's why I train it.
Yeah, yeah, and that's true. People have these traditional things that they have just kind of absorbed, and they just assume that that's the right way to do it. And I agree that when they realize that they don't have to do all that stuff, they really are relieved. Say, oh, thank goodness, because they really don't enjoy being so formal and controlling with their dog. They really enjoy the relationship with their dog so much more when it can be a lot more give and take, and the dogs enjoy it more, and there's just less conflict, which is awesome, which is really great.
I completely agree. And I feel like I'm a parent to 2 children, one already 19, one 17 and a half, freshman in college and senior in high school. And but all the time they were growing up, I was never did anything that I would consider discipline or disciplinarian. I just, I had expectations of them, and I taught them to do things. And, if they didn't succeed, then I looked at it the same way I look at dogs. Okay, how can I help them to succeed in this situation? Clearly, we're not there yet. And I think that there's a movement in the parenting world to do that like, it's not about discipline, it's about helping our children and raising them and teaching them. And I feel like, because I was a dog trainer and I already had that mindset, like, if a dog didn't do something, I don't think, oh, this dog's bad. I'm like, okay, well, what about this training situation and this environment was a barrier to this dog's success? Not like, why aren't they doing this? And I think I carry that over into my parenting. And well, obviously I don't know what my kids like tell their friends about me and how we did it, but like, I just don't feel like we have as much conflict in our household as we would if we'd done it another way. Just because I want them to succeed, they want to succeed, and it doesn't have to be so adversarial.
Yeah.
And I think that's come from dogs. In my world, that's come from dogs to children.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things that I really enjoyed in your book is so many examples of how you raised your kids using the same principles that we use in dog training, of positive reinforcement and classical conditioning. And there's one thing that I would love it if you would share, if you remember this story. It's about how you taught your boys were very young at the time. I don't remember, but they might have been like, I don't know, kindergarten age or around that. And you taught them to stop before they walked into the road. Because like you said, it's every parent's nightmare that a child would just run into the road, chase a ball or something like that, and put themselves in danger. So you told a story about, do you remember that story?
I do. Yeah. And I have video of
that.
it. Yeah. Well, we live on a corner in not a busy neighborhood, but not one of these really remote little cul-de-sac streets. And I was always outside with my kids when they were young, of course. And I was kind of getting to the point where they were just about ready. I was thinking about them sort of, when will they be able to be on their own? And I was like, well, it has to be when I really am 100% confident they wouldn't cross into the road. And what I remember thinking is that, well, I've already solved this problem with dogs. Like, you barrier train dogs, you can train them not to go any further than a certain point. So I did that with my kids. And so basically the end behavior was, I wanted them to run down our driveway and stop a few feet before the road, just to give a little slack, and my feeling was that I wanted them to be so in the habit of doing that, that someday when they saw a dog they knew across the street, or a friend, or a ball rolled into the road, they would have that habit of stopping, because it's all about the habit of kind of a combination of muscle memory and, cognitive memory. And so I started by just walking, holding their hands, because they were like 2 and 3, or maybe even younger when I started this. And I would walk every time we'd get to the car, which was in our garage, we'd start by just walking out to the edge of the road. And then I would give them a Tic Tac or a candy or a mint, or tell them they were such good, strong, smart boys or whatever. And then we started doing it where we would run a little bit faster and do it. So it was really kind of an abrupt stop. And then, just like anything in dog training, there's step by step by step, you make it a little harder. And then I had it where we weren't holding hands, but I was still walking with them. And then because it was a new level of freedom, we weren't holding hands. We went slower and they stopped. And then eventually, we would go faster like that. And then they did it on their own, but first slowly. And I was always reinforcing, with bubbles and stickers and all the little things that little kids like. And then, for a couple of years, every time we get out to the car, I'd have them run to the road kind of as fast as they could, which wasn't that fast then, although they're quite fast now. They're track kids, and then they would come back to the car, and it worked so well because they were just in the habit of it. And actually related to that, I've always talked to my kids about dog training, and they use these principles. It's how they were raised. It's how they understand the whole idea of influencing and teaching others. And my younger son is a triple jumper, or the old hop, skip, and a jump. And he's training me to try the triple jump. I actually this Saturday have my first meet where I'm doing the triple jump. And if anyone's ever seen it, you do 3 jumps, I'll do 2 on my right foot, the 1 on my left, and you run down the runway before doing it and then land in the sand pit. And I started to run down the runway at a practice this weekend. And then I realized my steps were off. So I turned around and went back to start over. And my son said, Mom, you're going to want to, if you do that, you can run down you only get four attempts in a meet. So if you run down and realize you don't want to do it, you can turn back, but you have to stay on the runway. If you go off the runway, then you're done with your jump. But if you go back along the runway instead of going off to the side, so he's like, so why don't you do it now and actually practice? Just run down, stop, and head back on the runway. He's like, I want you to actually practice it. And I was like, wow, my son could be a dog trainer. It's the same thing. So it's slightly related.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love those connections that you make throughout the book. There's a question in the chat. And she sent it to me in a direct message. And I'm going to read it to you so that you can respond. And if anyone else on the call has a question, go ahead and put it in the chat, or if you prefer, you can just unmute yourself and ask it. But this is from Beverly. And she says, I love the clarity about things like lip licking, yawning, and other things that indicate fear. And Beverly is a student of mine. So in our group, we've been learning that such practices also indicate that the dog is self-soothing, which is a good thing. My confusion is over whether we know whether the dog is fearful or helping herself. And I think I probably do recognize the difference, but I wonder if Karen would address this question. So basically, when we see those indications of calming signals, of lip licking and yawning and so forth, is the dog trying to soothe herself, or is the dog fearful?
It's such a great question. And I don't really have an answer because we don't know. But I think it's wonderful, Beverly, that you're bringing up this idea of it is complex. This is not, it's not super simple. It's not like, a robot that has, 3 behaviors and you know what each of them sort of indicate or whatever. I mean, these are complex beings. The idea of calming signals and self-soothing, I really feel like that's a great hypothesis. And there've been a lot of great observations, obviously from Turd Rugas originally, about these kind of yawning and lip licking, especially, and some other things like lookaways and sniffing the ground. Nobody really knows. There aren't data about what these accomplish or what their purpose is or what they're for. Certainly self-soothing is one possibility. And what I can say I feel quite confident of is that we don't necessarily know about, like if we see, say, a dog lip licking, exactly what that means. Maybe that is some self-soothing, maybe it is some calming, maybe it is indication of anxiety. But what I do feel confident we can say is that the dog is expressing there's some discomfort, because either it's like a direct sign of some kind of anxiety or discomfort, or they're trying to soothe themselves from some, negative feeling. So, I mean, I really feel like I hope more people study this. It's such a great question, because we really don't know. And all of us that are working with dogs professionally or personally, we're sort of basing everything we do sort of on our best guess at this moment. And it's a moving target because there's always more research. I've definitely thought a lot about many of these things have been described about as calming signals, and they seem to function in the sense that they do often make other animals around them seem to act more calm. But I often wonder, well, is it like is the intention to calm that other individual down, or is one individual seeing that another individual is a little uncomfortable kind of makes them feel like, oh, okay, I'm uncomfortable too, it's okay? I don't know. And it almost makes my head hurt, the swirl of potential information with all the unknowns, because every time you ask a question, you get more questions. So I guess, Beverly, unfortunately, I can say, woohoo, I love your question, but I don't really have an answer.
And it's exciting in one sense and bewildering in another sense, that we're constantly learning so much more about animals, and there's still so much that we don't know. But knowing Beverly, I think her next question might be, well, if we see an animal performing this way and we don't know exactly what it means, what should we do? How should we respond appropriately to that? What would be a way that would support that animal?
Well, I would say it's sort of what I was saying at the very beginning of our meeting today. Somehow take the pressure off. Something about the environment seems to be making the animal feel less than like the happy-go-lucky, relaxed, all is good, kind of comfortable environment. So, that maybe you need to remove them from that environment. Maybe you need to remove another animal from that environment to support that animal. Maybe you need to soothe that animal. Maybe you need to offer them something to try to make it positive, like food or toys. But in generally, some kind of change that takes the pressure off and improves the environment for that animal. And it's, the possible ways to do that are, endless, because it depends on the animal and the environment. And there may be some guesswork. You may see, oh, do they seem more comfortable if I do this? Nope. Okay, let's try that. It is a lot of guesswork, unfortunately, like most things with behavior.
Yeah. Just making some change in the environment and see if it helps. I guess that's the only thing we can do, because like you said, every situation is unique.
Yeah, and just like I talked about, like choices, like say you have an animal like in the house and they seem to be that way. Maybe a guest came over and they're uncomfortable. One of the things you can do, say if you have a fenced in yard, for example, or even just if you have another room, open the door and see if the animal wants to leave. That can be a very simple way to see, like, if they choose to leave. I mean, they might not choose to leave for some other reason. It might be raining outside and they'd rather be in here with a scary visitor than out in the rain. You don't know for sure. But if you give them some kind of choice, or open their crate, if that's someplace they go to be comfortable, or, turn on a white noise machine and see if they relax. This is anything to potentially change the environment and give them a choice. Like, would they like to be closer to that noise or further away? And it's always, we're all essentially all the time, whether we're raising children or raising dogs or we're in a marriage, we're always experimenting. Oh, does this make it better? Oops, I wish I hadn't done that. If I'd known that was going to be the result, I would not have done that. And I tried, that kind of thing.
Yeah, live and learn. And it's just getting feedback and then responding to the feedback. And I totally agree with what you said about letting the dog leave. If they're uncomfortable, let them get their comfortable distance. Let them leave if that's what they really want to do. There's a question from Alicia about animal communication. And she says, I have found it very helpful and useful to use animal communication with the dogs to learn directly from them their truth. Your thoughts?
So I don't know a ton about animal communication. Like I'm trained as an ethologist, which is a different way of approaching and learning about animals. What I can say is that I think a lot of people who work as animal communicators seem to be very intuitive. And I think they're picking up on a lot of things about animals' emotions or comfort level. I don't have any reason personally to believe that they're really able to detect the animal's thoughts, but that reflects my view as a scientist, where we kind of consider the brain a bit of a black box where we don't really know, exactly what's going on, not counting, MRIs sort of in the brain. What I feel is that if people consult an animal communicator and that person tells them something about their dog that resonates with them, then it reflects that animal communicator was able to learn the same things about your dog that you already know. And if that feels helpful to you, then I'm all for it. Like, I'm always for all sorts of ways of approaching a problem. If they say something that doesn't seem to reflect the dog that you know, and it doesn't seem to make sense, I feel like everyone knows their own dog better than anyone else knows that dog. And so I would take it with a grain of salt. So I am not, discounting animal communication, but I can't say that I've really totally bought into it. But I do know that a lot of people find it helpful, and I'm in favor of anything we find helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So I don't see any other questions in there. And does anyone have a question? You can feel free. I believe you can unmute yourself if you have trouble. Tell me in the chat and I will unmute you. Does anyone else have any questions for Karen? Put that in there. And let's see. Okay. All right. So Alicia has a follow-up. She said, what are your thoughts on dogs' primary form of communication?
Well, I have a couple thoughts on that. The first of which is that I'm not really sure anybody knows. I have said for many years that dogs communicate far more verbally, far more like visually than they do verbally. I think there's much more communication with their body language than with their vocalizations. But I think the more we learn about vocalizations, the more we learn maybe it's not as different as we thought. But they do seem to be more responsive to human body movement than to our language. But then it's sort of come to my attention in the last decade or so that in that comparison, visual communication seems to be more important than verbal communication. I was no mention of olfactory communication, which they seem to do the most of all. And it's especially appalling that I didn't really sort of register that, because I did my dissertation work in graduate school on social wasps, and they communicate with chemicals. Ants and wasps and bees and termites communicate so much with chemicals. That is the primary modality. So it's very likely that dogs communicate even more with scent than they do with visual cues. It's a little hard for humans to access that too much. Like, we can't sense a lot of it. We can't emit, like, we can give verbal and visual things. We can't really do too much with odor. What I will say that much like people, they use a variety of different types of communication. I still tend to, and this might be a human bias, really tend to their visual communication, because I personally can learn a lot more from a dog watching what they do. Like, if I were watching a video with the sound off, I would get a lot more out of it than if I were watching a video with the sound on and my eyes closed. So I think the visual communication is still key, but I think we're still just at the tip of the iceberg in terms of understanding the way they use scents and other olfactory cues.
Yeah, I think that olfactory is much more impactful, much more huge, I guess, for dogs than we ever imagined. And I think there's more and more research into that. And I know for myself that I can communicate visually with my own personal dogs that I know intimately and they know me intimately. I can communicate with them just with a slight change in facial expression, and they get it. And I know that if I've made a mental decision that I'm going to do something, go somewhere that includes the dog that is included in that trip starts to just go ballistic, because for some reason they can sense that, and they pick up on that communication, and that just happens over and over again. And I know that the same thing happens with other people and their dogs. The dogs sense things. And I think you mentioned in your book, and I actually highlighted that sentence because it really resonated with me, is that dogs communicate a lot, though we typically understand little of what they're trying to convey. And I think that's probably, our mission, if we care about our dogs, is to be constantly working to understand better and better what they're what they're trying to say to us.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, it's a biological miracle, our friendship with dogs. I mean, it really is when you think into the whole animal world, species that are this close together in mutualistic relationships are relatively a small percentage of them. The fact that we're so close with them and live together is amazing and wonderful. And we have this huge connection, but there's no denying that when you figure the amount of miscommunication that can happen within a species, of course, that's compounded when you go across species as well. And so I think it's always mindful of us not to think too much of ourselves and think we really understand too much, always be on that quest, as you say, to learn more and better understand them. And I think it's amazing what's happened in the last couple of decades in terms of how many more dogs, I think, and people are living better lives because of this effort that we've collectively made to understand our dogs better. And
Yes.
it makes me really glad when I think about that, like we're on the road forward in progress in a nice way.
Yeah, yeah. We have a question from Marcia, but before that, Haley, to answer your question, yes, the recording will be available. I'll put the link up and you'll all be able to rewatch this, or anyone who missed it can watch the entire interview. So, okay, so Marcia has a question. She says, my boyfriend's dog is very rambunctious and barky. He has no control. I'm assuming you mean the boyfriend. The boyfriend has no control, but his dog is very good with me. I trained a retired greyhound to be my service dog. How can I overcome the dual training so the dogs won't be confused? And I think, Marcia, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think what you mean is, how can you overcome the difference in the way the dog responds to your boyfriend compared to the way he responds to you? So I think that's what you mean. So, Karen?
Well, I'll start answering it in that term, and Marcia, let us know if we're off track here. I mean, I would say, and this is always an interesting thing, whether it's two people interacting with a dog or two people raising a child or two teachers in a classroom with students, there's differences in how we do it. And it sounds like the great news is obviously you've trained a greyhound to be a service dog, which is amazing. Congratulations on that. And that this dog is responding well to you. And so it sounds like maybe there's a little bit of a better match between your style of training and interaction in terms of helping a dog have some impulse control and do what is most desired than your boyfriend. And so I would say, I would figure out a way to positively reinforce your boyfriend for doing the things you want. So say, for example, speaking in a calmer voice just works a little bit better, or maybe a slightly higher pitched voice, which, men and women don't always have the same issues with. Then do something that he would find reinforcing, whatever, your boyfriend, what would be appealing to him. But certainly approval is very reinforcing. Like, oh my gosh, I love the way you did that. And I can see how your dog responded to it. It can be very reinforcing. So I would think of trying to reinforce your boyfriend for doing the things that work the best and hopefully shaping that towards even more effective training. It is a tricky thing, though. I certainly don't mean to say like, oh, well, you just positively reinforce your boyfriend. It's so simple. Like it's simple in theory, but simple doesn't mean easy. And there can be a lot of steps. I hope that works out. I love the idea of your training experience with the service dog and then with his dog, hopefully being really helpful for your whole sort of, social group there.
Yeah, and I so agree with that positively reinforcing the boyfriend is going to get a lot better results in the long run than trying to correct what he's doing. And, and I think dogs are pretty resilient and they know the difference between one person and another. And they're forgiving in the sense that they know that responding to this person is different from responding to that person. So addressing the boyfriend, I think is the way to go. Yeah. So we have a question from Gret. Can you talk a little bit about soothing or reducing anxiety in a dog? What are some things that work for some dogs? I'm referring to the day-to-day things that might cause anxiety, such as meeting new people or dogs.
So this is where two things I think can be really helpful for sort of reducing, well, actually a few things, three things maybe that can reduce the anxiety for that. One is using classical conditioning to try to help. So if the dog is nervous about meeting people, but every single person has, stake, then that can help. The dog can get this very positive association with it, much like many dogs have a positive association with a leash because it means a walk and that makes them happy. But there's nothing inherently positive about having something strapped to your neck, obviously. So using classical conditioning in that way to help the dog feel good about those situations, especially in terms of meeting people, but also with dogs, making sure that you don't have the dog, over threshold or in over their head. So if your dog is great meeting, very calm people or, adults, then you have to work gradually towards like late teens and early teens down towards meeting kids. Or like say many dogs are really nervous about men. And so you would definitely want to, avoid having sort of the Uberman of like really, really tall, really, really deep voice, broad shoulders, beard, mustache, all, you want to start with the easier one so that can help them learn to handle that situation. Another thing, and this is obviously under the advice of a veterinarian only, would be many times exercise can help. And people often talk about dogs like, oh, like like that kind of idea, a good dog is a tired dog. And a lot of dogs that are really well behaved and calm after exercise, it's not so much that they're tired, although some dogs can be tired, but that they're content. And that comes from the chemicals that are released, the endorphins that are released during long distance exercise, especially endocannabinoids and things like that. So sometimes if they're going to be in a situation that they might find stressful, try to chemically alter their body with some serious exercise, not necessarily hard and fast, but like long and slow. That can be helpful. And then another thing is trying to give them some kind of a warning about what's going to happen. So say they're afraid of seeing dogs on walks or they become anxious when they see one. If you can teach them not to be taken by surprise, which can cause so much anxiety, like they suddenly look up and they see a dog. If you can teach them a cue like, who's that? Or there's a dog. So then they look around, they're expecting to see a dog, they see it, they still might not love it. But I think a lot of what causes dogs anxiety is the unknown and the unpredictable. I personally, not a big fan, like jump scares, surprises, super not a fan myself. I tend towards anxiety. I don't have anxiety, but I like when people talk about having anxiety, it resonates with me. I relate to it. I don't like surprises. So I often think of that with dogs. Like they don't want to be surprised either. You can't always help it. Sometimes you're going to round a corner and there's a dog, but if as often as possible, you can let them know what's coming. I think that predictability can really ease a lot of anxiety for many dogs.
Yeah, and I'm a huge fan of telling dogs, like you just described, telling them what's about to happen or telling them what you're going to do. Like these days it's muddy outside, so I have to wipe feet when they come in. And before I wipe their feet, I tell them I need to wipe your feet. All right. So, and I tell them as I'm wiping your feet, I'm wiping your feet. So so it's not just grabbing them and forcing them to hold still. They don't love having their feet cleaned, but they stand there and they accept it because I'm talking to them. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of that. I actually have one of my students, I don't know if she's on the call, she does that a lot, and she just started doing that naturally with her dog. Like if the dog was getting excited, she would actually sit down and have a little conversation and tell the dog what was going on, what to expect, and why it's not a problem. And the dog would just relax and calm down, which I just thought that was so beautiful. So yeah.
I think sometimes the tone of voice, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think signs the tone of voice, like there's an emotional contagion. Dogs are empathetic. We understand them. They understand us. And I think that if you talk in a calm and soothing manner, that can be helpful. And I wanted to mention something on muddy paws, because I used to live on a muddy farm in Wisconsin. In the spring, it's like, oh my gosh, I felt like I got up every day, I brushed my teeth, and the rest of the day I spent like wiping muddy paws. It was ridiculous. Yeah. And one of the things that I did was I actually had like a plastic sled, but you could use any kind of pan. And after coming in from a walk, I would just have my dog step into that. Like I try to have the water be warm. I couldn't always, and that dog didn't care that much actually about the temperature, but step in there and then I would wipe the paws off. And if my dog was like, no, I'm not stepping in there, then I wouldn't wipe his paws. I mean, I just would wait, and we just wait outside till he sort of more or less dried there, just hanging out, because he didn't like it. And I also, this isn't paws, but it's bodies. I always teach dogs, if I've lived in snowy places, they get really muddy on their bellies if they go running in the mud. And I'd always I taught them to crawl. I think crawl is the most practical skill for this, because you can teach them to crawl through the snow, and it doesn't get all the mud off, but it's a good step. So crawling through snow is a cue that like all dogs have. Yeah. And I mean, some dogs won't like it. I mean, there's some dogs that are they tend to be very cold, and you can barely get them out to potty in the snow, and it's just cruel to make them do that. But like I had a retriever cross where he would roll in the snow, but I taught him to do it because his belly, that he had really soft undercoat. And oh my gosh, it just like dealing with the mud on a farm in Wisconsin is just like, it still makes me feel like tired and like having to do 10 loads of laundry kind of a situation.
Yeah, now I don't feel so bad. It's been pouring for over a week, so we've got lots of mud. I have a follow-up from Marcia. She said, thank you for your sage advice. Good walks are always good, and mutual cooperation is very beneficial. I always vocalize to the dogs. She says, thanks. And it's from Marcia.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Yeah, and let's see, we have, I have another question from Debbie. She says, could you pair a scent with a pleasurable experience to help a fearful dog? Owner gives dog treat after spraying Adaptil, or plays with dog after Adaptil. Then when a stranger enters the home, Adaptil is sprayed on them. Communicating through scent is fascinating. What do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely think it's true. I mean, you can do any kind of paired classical conditioning paired on like that. And all that has to happen is that from the dog's point of view, there's a predictability, ideally 100%, between one stimulus and then something else that happens in the environment, like leash equals walk, running shoes equals run, doorbell equals visitor coming, like a new toy showing up, and you'll also get a treat. So if that smell becomes associated with something positive happening after, then that smell can actually take on an Adaptil. Actually, it's not, I mean, it might actually naturally make the dog feel better. That's, what it does. This is it used to be called DAP, and now it's called Adaptil. And it seems to be very soothing to a lot of dogs. But if you pair it up to even strengthen that positive experience, and that can be helpful. One thing I would say is if you do Adaptil and then someone comes over, I would still give them something that is positive, like a toy or a treat or a bone or a greenie or whatever they can have. So that you just continue that pairing, even if it's also associated with a visitor. And I think the idea of using scent to affect emotion, it's so strong in people as well, but obviously in dogs. And I think it's such a great thing to do.
Yeah, and it can have the reverse effect too. Dogs out on a walk will suddenly avoid some area or stop in their tracks, and we don't know what it is, but it might be something they're smelling. So yes, odor is really so powerful with dogs.
Yeah, definitely. And it is powerful, which is sort of, it can be kind of, it needed, it's sort of like with great power comes great responsibility. You have to use scent very carefully. You wouldn't want to like spray Adaptil and then and then a visitor coming over if the visitor scared them, because what you can easily do is teach them to be terrified of Adaptil. And I mean, I've heard of people doing that where they're like, going out to do some conditioning work and they start putting steak like in it or whatever treats in a bait bag. And then dogs learn, oh my gosh, my owner's putting treats in this bag. I know we're going to see strangers. I hate when I see my owner put treats in this. So you have to be very cautious about how it's used because it is so powerful.
Yeah, it can backfire for sure. There's another question from Alicia. And she asked, well, two questions actually. What's your perspective on human leadership to support the dog? And second question, what are your thoughts on body misalignment as the root of many behavior issues?
So let me start with the second one. Body realignment. I really believe that if dogs feel physically well, that it helps with behavior. So I definitely feel like that makes a lot of sense, but I have to be honest, I'm just not very knowledgeable about it. I'm very supportive of those kind of protocols, but not knowledgeable about them. They seem to work and help a lot of people, but I don't know too much about it. So I try to stay in my wheelhouse and only speak about what I know. What was the first one? I'm sorry.
What's your perspective on human leadership to support the dog?
Okay, so yeah, I have very strong views about leadership, and that is the idea that I think that the concept can be very confusing and problematic as people use it in different ways. Some dogs, they're really just our equals and their friends, and I don't think that any leadership is necessarily, desirable. The kind of leadership I think can be useful is for dogs who are insecure and for whom predictability is really helpful. I think a very certain specific type of leadership is helpful. And to me, and my mom was an elementary school teacher, and I often think of the way elementary school teachers do things. So these are the kind of dogs that it helps to be really predictable and really clear. The same way that for, say, a first grader that's a little nervous, they do really well with the teacher that's like, okay, every day you come in, you put your lunch in your cubby, you put your jacket there, you go down and sit in your seat, and you just bring out your crayons and your paper, and that's how you start. Then we're going to have story time, and then we're going to do this, and then you're all going to head out to recess. It's very predictable. To me, that's a form of leadership. And I think that is really valuable for certain sorts of dogs who are insecure. So it's not leadership in any kind of bossiness or authority. It's more just like, I got this. I have everything under control. So I love the idea of, say, the dog that's insecure, like every morning you get up, the first thing we do is we head out into the yard, you potty, then you come and you have your lunch, then we have a little cuddle session, then we do this, like that predictability. That type of leadership, the way really good elementary school teachers make their classroom a safe and peaceful, understandable place without this anxiety of like, wait, what's going on? Wait, we're going to music class. Wait, what's going on? Wait, we're doing math now. Why do we do math now? The idea of the predictability as a form of leadership, I feel strongly about. The way leadership often is used in a way of a sense of power is nothing. That's nothing. That's just not a part of any way that I interact with dogs or people. So, and the word leadership can be problematic because it can mean so many different things. So I think of it as like a nice, like kindergarten teacher. That's the kind of leadership I like.
Benevolent leadership.
Yeah, very benevolent, very predictable, and very like kind and warm and like guiding, not telling so much, but just kind of, I often just think of like, when you see like videos of just like a bird that like brings their wings out and covers up all their little chicks, that's like the kind of leadership, like the protective kind.
Yeah, right. And that of course makes me think too that when we speak about predictability, I think of it that, the routine that you mentioned is super important for dogs, but also the predictability of the person. Like you're consistent, you're reliable, you're not going to be suddenly angry and upset and the next minute calm and relaxed, and the dog doesn't know what to expect from you. And I think that makes dogs feel safe too, if they can count on the person to be predictable as well as the events in their daily life.
I think that's so true. And I think predictability is such a fascinating thing because there's certainly many people who have maybe had a boss or a colleague that was just like kind of mean and awful. And while that's not a pleasant environment to be in, it's almost less psychologically stressful to have someone that's just kind of predictably, like not really like the nicest person, than to have someone that's sometimes really sugary and sweet, but sometimes they like lash out, like they're really angry, and you sort of don't know what you're going to get on a given day. That's much more aversive, I think, to a lot of people, and presumably to dogs. And like predictability is valuable, even if what's predictable might not be a great thing, although of course we do want to be a great thing for our dogs and our predictability. But unpredictability, especially for dogs who are fearful or anxious or insecure in any way, it's really just a huge negative in their lives. And since we want to be positives in their life, predictability is really helpful.
Yeah, let's see. And Debbie says, good point, not poisoning the queue, adaptable
Absolutely.
stranger, right. And she says, thanks for a great webinar. She loved it in capital letters.
Oh, I'm glad.
Yeah. And Marcia says, my dog always loved walks. Everyone asked about our walks, and I tell them she is checking her P-mail.
Right. Email is very
right.
important.
Very important, yes. And so Alicia has a question again. So how do you see how mama dogs parent their pups?
That is such a fascinating question. And I don't actually have a huge amount of detail on it because I've never bred dogs. I mean, I've obviously been places where people have young dogs, but I haven't had the luxury of like, the whelping pen in the living room and seeing it all. But one thing I can say is that I think just like with humans, there are some females who are really good moms and are very gentle and patient with their puppies. And I think that's valuable. And some that are sort of cross and crabby, some learn to do better as they get older. Maybe their first litter, they're not as patient and good. What I would say about mothers and puppies is that each individual has a parenting style. And I do think it makes a difference. I know there have been studies in service dog groups about what like parenting styles of the females and how that affects the likelihood the pups will make good service dogs, but I honestly don't remember the details. But I do think that the best mothers across species are consistent. And also there have been a number of studies that across a huge number of species, individuals that are playful with their offspring tend to have the best relationships with them. And I think since aggression and play are my two favorite areas of interest in ethology, I love to know that playfulness has that value in terms of the parenting child relationship. It makes me just glad to know that what seems intuitively obvious to me is in fact true.
Yeah. Yes, that is so true. I actually have raised several litters of puppies and watched mama dogs interacting with them over the years. And I was involved in breeding dogs for the show ring and for competition. So I do have that little piece of history to fall back on. And yes, they are, you're right, Karen, each one has a different style. There was one mother that actually would not even tolerate her puppies from the moment they were born. She actually hated them. So needless to say, she was not continued in a breeding program. She was found a lovely pet home where she lived for many years, a very happy life, and not as a mother. So
that's so interesting. Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. I just got excited about something.
Yeah, I'm going to let you say that in a second, but I want to give the contrast to it. That talk about playfulness. The most recent litter of puppies was actually a litter that was an accident, and it was a stray dog that just showed up at my house and long yada yada yada. She had puppies. She was the most wonderful mother. Talk about playfulness. She loved to play with those dogs. She would go out with them, and they would almost be like, you've seen a flock of birds flying through the air. They're all synchronized and how they know what the movements are going to be, back and forth. That's the way her puppies would be with her. She would run with them and play with them. She was the most wonderful mother. So there's opposite extremes. So I just making that point to support what you said about the differences in mothers. So go ahead. I hope I didn't make you forget your point.
Oh, no, that's fine. And when you talk about the differences of mothers, sometimes I often think of it as being a good match. Like, we don't choose the children that we have, and we don't choose, a full-grown adult dog if we're getting a puppy. Sometimes I think parenting or raising has to do with it being a good match. Like if you have a family of people who are all really loud and extroverts and one child is really introverted and really sound sensitive, then no matter how good and kind and wonderful those parents are, they might not be the best match. So that I think is interesting. And I'm very interested in the female that you ended up placing in a good pet home who wasn't a good mom. And I think it's so interesting. And this is as a parent myself. So my first son was 11 months old when I got pregnant with the second one. And so I had two children under the age of 2 for a little while, and it's not easy. It's not, there was just a lot of diapers and a lot of, just crying and, some of it, not mine. And I think it's interesting, like if you don't have the sort of bonding with those children, if you don't have the proper like oxytocin response and the great love for them, it would be like untenable. Like if you didn't have joy in your children, the work it takes, especially with the young ones, would be like, there would be no reason to do it. It's because frankly, like without sounding like an unloving mother, some of the work in those early years is just not very fun. It's just, I used to say my son was just one big digestive system. He needed to be fed or changed or burped, or, he was hungry, and he was, perfectly lovely child. It's just, this is how babies are. And I think that if like, I'm wondering if that mother, like, a lot of, obviously women have postpartum depression or anxiety or whatever it's sort of classified as. And if you're not properly, like, not, I don't mean properly, but like, if you don't have a natural bond with your child right away, I don't know how you would do the work. And I wonder if that dog just literally didn't have the chemistry that allowed her to feel that love and connection. Because honestly, I mean, if you don't, I mean, like, parenting is hard enough when you love those children with every fiber of your being. And if you chemically don't have that happen, I don't know what it would be like. I
Yeah.
feel very grateful I bonded with my children, and I still was like, didn't sleep for like 4 years, which was not good. I don't know if there are other parents on this call, but I mean, I don't mean to sound negative. I love being a parent, but like every moment of every day was not a joy when they were little, I have to say.
Well,
Just
yeah,
being real.
that's a normal part of it, right? Yeah, that is a very good point. Of course, we'll never know. Now, this was years ago, and the dog lived to a ripe old age and did pass away. So this was quite a while ago, but it could certainly have been that for some reason her system didn't produce the hormones. She didn't have that oxytocin burst that new moms get, that just, so they just instinctively know what to do to care for their babies. She really didn't want to care
Right.
for them. I literally had to take her away because I didn't trust her alone with them, and put her
Right.
back in there and stand there and supervise her while she fed the puppies, and then take her away again. And she didn't miss that. When I took her away, she didn't want to go back. So
Yeah. I mean, it's so fascinating. I mean, not everyone's meant to have offspring. It's the simple truth.
yeah,
So,
right. And I have to say that the way you describe your parenting experience as a dog trainer in your book is so refreshing and so interesting. And I think anyone who is both a dog trainer and a parent will just totally resonate with some of those things, and probably get a lot of good parenting advice. So
good. Thank you for saying so.
yeah,
I'm so glad.
right. So let's see. Yeah, Alicia says, did that mama want to be bred? We'll never know. Good question. And Gret said, your mom and dog was making a good pack that could move and sync. Yes, they did. They moved. It was just so fun to just watch her playing with those puppies. It was really beautiful. And Marcia says, my beautiful greyhound girl was so receptive to other dogs, adult and pup. She would tolerate a while, and then she would correct the other dog without biting, just a clear sap to, yeah, they're so good at communicate. Dogs are just awesome at communicating with each other, giving each other advice and supervising each other, and they're just, yeah, they're just amazing. And oh, Marcia, thank you. Marcia, this is one of the best webinars about dogs. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad. Very reinforcing.
Yeah. So if there are no other questions, and again, this recording will be available, I'll put I'll email the link, and I'll put it in the Facebook group, and I'll put it on my Facebook page too for anyone. And Karen will also have the link, so she can post it wherever she wants to. And Karen, do you want to just say one final word about where people can get your book if they don't already have it, and if they're interested? And I highly recommend. It's one of the best dog training books you'll read, seriously. And I'm not just saying that because Karen's here. I really mean it. So do you want to say something about how they can get a hold of it?
Sure. Well, it's available on dogwise.com. And I mean, I love to support Dogwise because, they just, my husband used to call it the hide the credit card site, because when I would get on it, bad things would happen. But yeah, Dogwise calls it. And you can also buy it on Amazon.com. Clean Run sometimes carries it. I'm not sure if they're currently in stock. And then if anyone happens to be local here to me, I'm in Flagstaff, Arizona. It's available at the Flagstaff Market Station Cafe. So all of those places. It is available in a whole bunch of different countries through Amazon, and it is available either as a hard copy or as an ebook.
Wonderful. Okay, great. Treat Everyone Like a Dog is the title. Great advice. Actually, I had this book in the doctor's office once, and the reception at the desk said, "Oh, I love the title of your book."
Oh, that's good. I'm so glad. When I was originally writing it, I called it my Treat Everyone Like a Dog book, but I was like, of course I'm not going to call it that. That sounds, not good. And I had all these other titles in mind. And finally I was like, it's the name of the book. It was destined to be the name of the book, even if it took me a while to come around to it.
Yeah, good title. Very good title. Okay, and just everyone stay tuned. I'm going to be doing more live online programs about helping your dogs through the emotions of the coming holidays, because it can be really super stressful for some dogs. Some dogs just don't tolerate all those changes. We talked about predictability and the emotional stress of sometimes meeting strangers. For some dogs, it's really difficult. For others, it's difficult in a different way. They don't get afraid, they just get overexcited. That's not a good feeling either for dogs, to be just so feeling so overexcited and out of control. They just don't know what to do with themselves. That doesn't feel good for them either. So anyway, stay tuned. I'll be sending out more information about that, and I hope you'll join us. So thank you so much. Mary says, Karen, I've been reading your articles for years. So nice to meet you online. That's Mary DeBono.
Nice to meet you too, Mary.
Yes,
This
Mary.
is how I feel like I've had a lot of people in recent years with, COVID.
Right. Yes, me too. Me too. Exactly. Yeah, Mary has a lovely practice of working with dogs emotionally also. So that's
great.
awesome.
It's good to know.
Yeah. All right. So if there's nothing else from anyone, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. I so appreciate you being here, and I will send out the link for the recording. And thank you, Karen, for joining us and for dealing with the snowstorm and your internet popping out on you. So
thank you. For anyone, I didn't mention this, but my internet is out possibly due to the snowstorm, and I'm in my husband's office at the university, which explains the background, which is not dog stuff.
yeah. Okay, thanks again, everybody. So bye.
Bye. Thank you, Marilyn. I appreciate it. Bye.
Thanks, Karen. Bye-bye.